Greetings everyone, Brett here with Hammerhead Model Making, and on today's full build video we're going to be looking at the Meng F A-18E Super Hornet. This build was chosen by my patrons, and I'm really glad they did because this was an extremely fun kit to build. This was my first Meng kit. I'd never built one before, but I bought this kit the day it was released just because I was just really excited to have a nice brand new, Super Hornet tooled kit. And it was released just before the Hobby Boss kit, so I got the main kit first. But I heard the Hobby Boss kit's actually pretty good as well. But so this is the E model. This is the single seat version. It comes with 5 livery options in the kit. One of them being Maverick's Hornet from the movie Top Gun Maverick. And that one was slightly tempting, but I decided to go for the more colorful Tomcatters CAG bird on this build. So anyways, construction starts as normal in the cockpit, and the cockpit is very well detailed out of the box. Lots of plastic relief for buttons and switches and things. You do get this piece of photo etch to represent this part on the back deck of the cockpit, and fit here is fantastic and flawless. So I mean, you really could get away with not needing really much any kind of aftermarket in this kit. I imagine that the 3D decal market will be all over this, and we'll probably be able to make it look really nice. I think a resin seat would be an upgrade, but the plastic seat is not terrible out of the box. Especially considering that you actually get a pilot figure to add into your aircraft as well. And the pilot figure is really nice, and it was kind of hard to pass up putting him in. And so, kind of going out of my norm of putting pilots in my aircraft, I decided to do that with this one. Kind of go for a, just getting startup sequence kind of going kind of a deal. So here I've temporarily fit the ejection seat in so that I can dry fit how the pilot's going to fit into the cockpit. And in all honesty, you really don't even need to bother with this because the fit is just perfect. And for the most part, his hands line up with the controls. So kind of one of my biggest pet peeves when putting pilots in cockpits is like the floating hands thing, where they're just kind of like in the general vicinity of something, but just floating there. This one does a really good job of actually lining up with both the throttle and the control stick. So props to Meng on that. The pilot is multi-part, so they're not skimping out on details. And I just overall very, very pleased with how it looks and how it turned out. I do have a separate video on painting the pilot on my Instagram. So if you're interested on how I actually ended up painting the pilot, go check out my Instagram. You'll be able to find it there. It's just a short video. It's like 60 seconds long. But yeah, moving on, just making sure everything's all posed in there. He will get painted separately. The ejection sheet will be painted separately as well. So I did add the riser detail just with some Tamiya tape. I do recommend that if you're going to use tape like this to represent, seat belts and things like that, that you do actually glue it down. I have found, at least especially with the Tamiya tape, that it tends to lift over time. So I always just put a little tiny dot of super glue on the tape, and that's usually enough to secure it. But just kind of a heads up, if you do plan on using tape like this, make sure you're gluing it down and not just using the tackiness of the tape to secure it. The nose gear builds up really nicely. It is multiple parts, which really makes painting easy. You do get like the sidewall detail separate from the roof of the wheel well. That always makes me happy because it means I'm not having to like maneuver a brush inside of something like that, and that can be a pain. The main landing gear wheel wells are really nicely detailed. The intake trunks have some rather large ejector pin markings on them, and they are fairly visible if you're looking down the intake trunks. So you really do need to take care of those, especially if you're trying to go for like a seamless intake look. It's a must. So this is kind of frustrating on such a modern new kit. Why couldn't they have put the ejector pins on the opposite side? That wasn't going to be. But anyways, just sanding out the putty just to clean up those ejector pin marks. Fortunately, they are fairly shallow, so it doesn't require a lot of sanding to get it done, but just be aware that they are there and they need to be cleaned up. So once we kind of get all of the major components put together, we can start painting a lot of the interior stuff. I am using the Alclad gloss black base as my primer for the interior stuff, and so everything just gets a nice good coating of this inside and out. And I like using the black base, especially doing interior parts like the cockpit. Just kind of helps you in the painting process create some shadows and stuff. This might be a little sacrilegious to use an Air Force color, but in a Navy jet, but it looked about the right color to my eye. So we're just going to go ahead and get the cockpit tub painted up, as well as the sidewalls and the instrument panel with this nice U.S. Air Force light gray. Just making sure to get a good coverage, but still allowing for a little bit of shadow in there. It just kind of helps add some depth to the paint job and to the cockpit interior. Sidewall detail is fairly nice. The actual instrument panel itself is really well detailed. Very nice for a plastic part. You get all the little bumps and switches and everything. So very, very nice. The wheel wells are getting painted with the Outlaw Paints Insignia White. This is a lacquer paint, and it goes down really nice straight out of the bottle. So highly recommend it. Outlaw Paints is based out of Australia. And I believe here in the United States, High Altitude Hobbies carries their paint range. So they're very nice paints. If you're into lacquer paints, these are very nice, very easy. Like I said, they spray straight right out of the bottle with no thinning needed. So I like it. But we're just going through all of the wheel well stuff here. Like I mentioned, the wheel wells are extremely well detailed out of the box. You could probably add a little bit more cabling and hydraulic hose detail, but they're pretty good. I didn't really, at least comparing to some of the reference pictures that I could find of the wheel wells, they really didn't skimp on the details. So, all right, now we can start doing a little bit of detail painting here. I'm just going to paint the back deck NATO black in the cockpit. So I've just got the front half masked off, fairly simple. Try not to flood the photo etch so that you ruin that nice screen detail. And also be sure that when you paint the inside of the actual fuselage halves, that you're painting that back area at least black or something, so that you don't have bare plastic showing through there, because it will be fairly visible, especially if you have the canopy open on the finished model. Once everything's been painted, we can give it all a nice coat of gloss in preparation for decals and weathering. I was a little concerned that the decals would have trouble fitting over a lot of the raised details in the cockpit, and I almost considered hand painting everything, but I figured I'd give them a try and see how things went. And I'm glad that I did, because in the end, the decals actually worked out really nicely. Painting the inside, or gloss coating the inside of the wheel wells is kind of important, especially because we're going to be doing some heavy washes in there just to help pick out a lot of that detail, as well as, they were a semi-gloss color to begin with. So I wanted to try a trick, not new trick. It's actually a trick that I had seen in a very old copy of Fine Scale Modeler, to paint the insides of the intakes using house paint. And I remember reading about this, but I've never tried it, so I figured this would be a good time. In hindsight, I learned that interior latex paint does a better job than what I used here. I think I used an enamel-based paint, but in the end, I eventually got what I was looking for. So essentially what I'm doing here is just pouring this paint into the top and allowing gravity to pull it down through the intake and out the bottom. It's messy, and it wasn't perfect, but for a first try, I think it looks pretty decent. So, and because it is a nice gloss finish, you do get that nice shine in there, and it kind of helps to bounce light down into the intake so that you can actually see the first stage compressors in these long intake trunks. So overall, I mean, I would say it was a successful experiment, and I definitely want to try it again, but I will use the correct paint next time, which should be like the interior latex style paint. So here we're applying decals, and I like that Meng provides all of the instrument decals as separate, like individual decals, as opposed to like just one giant sheet that you're supposed to try to fit on there. It is a little bit more time consuming to do the individual decals, but I think they do a much better job in the end of conforming to the details when they're all separate like this. But they did fit pretty nicely, and just hit them with a little bit of Walther Solvaset to get them to snuggle down and settle into all of the, the shapes and reliefs of the instrument panel. Here I'm painting some of the details in the nose wheel well, and just using this light gray color. I will eventually come in with slightly different colors, metallics and everything, just to kind of pick out all the fittings and fasteners and remaining hoses and cabling. So, but once that's all done, we can give everything a nice good wash. So I'm using the dark brown wash for green vehicles that I so often use, and just kind of applying this like a pin wash in the landing gear wheel wells. We will eventually remove the excess, but the wash does a really great job of highlighting all the beautiful rivet and cabling detail in these landing gear wheel wells. So here you can just see I'm removing it with a cotton bud, removing the excess with a cotton bud. This also kind of helps to blend some of that wash in there as well. All of the black parts are getting a little bit of a dry brush in the cockpit. This will help just highlight some of the raised detail, like on the ejection seat or the control column, just so you can really pick out a lot of that nice detail. You could go, I mean, based on reference pictures, you'd really be able to see how dinged up these jets could get, especially like, a couple months into a cruise. But because this is the CAG bird, I wasn't really interested in going super weathered, super dirty. Most of the pictures I found of this aircraft, it was relatively clean. So this is just what I'm going for here. Now we're hitting everything with a matte coat. This helps seal in all of our decals and the washes, and just provide a nice flat surface for the interior. Pretty simple. One of the things I wanted to try out here was using this UV curing resin to represent the glass on the instruments. So applying a little bit to my palette here, and then just using a little bit of wire, I can slowly apply it to the instrument panel faces and build up that nice layer. And then essentially what I do is I just hit it underneath a UV light. I have one for my 3D printer, and this stuff pretty much cures almost instantly, so it's really nice. It only needs like 30 seconds under the UV lamp for it to fully cure, and I think it's a pretty convincing look. I mean, once it's all in the cockpit and the aircraft is all closed up, it's kind of hard to notice, in hindsight, but it was good at practice, and I like the result. I think it turns out pretty good. So here you can see it after it's all been cured, nice and glossy, shiny. Pretty happy with it. So at this point, we can start getting everything all put together and start building up the fuselage and get moving on to painting. So there's a lot of plastic that is going into this aircraft. Like I mentioned before, you do get the full length intake trunks, you do get full cockpit. So there's just a lot you have to kind of very specific order of operations you have to build this. But it is a little complex. There's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of places where you could potentially mess up. But Meng's done a really good job of engineering this kit so that you have minimal seam cleanup, and when you do have seams, they're usually along existing panel lines. So they did a really good job on this. Right here, what I'm doing is I'm pre-painting the insides, like the front halves of the intakes. So I'm just painting this the fuselage color. I do this because it's just easier for me to paint it this way than trying to paint it when it's all put together and it's weird angles. So basically what I'll do here is I'll just pre-paint these parts and then kind of mask them off. And that way I just don't have to worry about trying to get my airbrush into some weird angles, trying to reach inside these intake trunks and not knowing if I'm getting good coverage or whatnot. So this just works out much better for me. So here the wheel wells, the intake trunks fit to the outer side of the intakes. Here we can install the inner portion of the intake, and fit is nearly flawless here. Everything lines up where it's supposed to, and it's pretty incredible, especially with the complex geometry of the intakes, both interior and exterior intakes. This is pretty impressive, just how nicely this fits. I remember I had attempted to build the Revell 1/48 scale Super Hornet that was released a number of years ago, and this part of that build was just atrocious. Nothing fit, and the way this all lines up is just, it's really good. So really, the only seams, at least on this part here, like there is this kind of long curved seam that runs along the bottom. That is not on a natural panel line, so that does need to be cleaned up. But the vertical seam is a natural panel line, so don't have to worry about that. Here you can see we're fitting in the nose wheel well into the nose fuselage halves. Again, fit here was really, really great. You do have a seam running along that bottom there. That's kind of a pain because there's a lot of like vents and things down there. So you just have to be really careful painting that. There will be a seam on top of the nose here as well. But fit here is pretty good so that it really doesn't take much to clean up these seam lines. Cockpit can be dropped in, and you do get options for folded wings or non-folded wings. So there are different parts that you have to use depending on which wing option you want to use. So just be aware of that while you're building it. You have to decide early on. But a lot of these parts are almost just press fit. You almost don't even need glue for a lot of these parts. So again, really, really nice for the engineering. The way that the lower fuselage have their fits on is really nice. The HUD is very well detailed, especially for plastic. I think you could definitely do a better job if you had a photo etch set here, but all things considered, the plastic part is actually really good. Going around the edges of the HUD with some transparent green paint, this just kind of helps sell the, that look on the actual HUD screens themselves. Kind of a fun little detail, especially how prominent this will be on the completed model. It just felt like it would be good to have that. So just using some Tamiya green clear paint there. So quite happy with how that turned out. I think it sells effect. I have seen people use like some cool iridescent effect on there. I really need to give that a try sometime. But so now we can fit the upper fuselage onto the lower fuselage. This is a really tight fit, and you really have to kind of get it in there, and it'll snap into place. So a little bit of pressure is required, but then once you get that snap, it's pretty solid. And again, they hide many of the seam lines along natural panel lines, so that is very nice and helpful. I did end up with a bit of a gap here between the top and the lower fuselage halves. Not sure if that's just the kit or just user error, but I shimmed it with a little bit of plastic, and that solved the problem. So now we're just going to clean up the seam line using various grits of sandpaper and sanding sticks and files and stuff to get that down. it really didn't take too long to get these seams cleaned up. They were pretty minimal and didn't really have to worry about destroying a lot of the surrounding detail. So here you can just see I've got a little bit of putty on there. That'll get sanded and cleaned up pretty easily. The wings are extremely nice. You do get the option of all of the control surfaces are posable. So you can do slats up and down. You can do the flaps up or down, ailerons up or down, wings folded or not folded, rudders free to move, elevators. I mean, everything is posable, which is very nice. It just gives you a lot of options on how you decide you want to display your Hornet here. If you do it right, the rudders you can leave them movable. I chose to do that just because I wasn't sure what I wanted for the final pose, and so I wanted to give myself the option of being able to make that change later on. So here you can see we're adding the slats and the complex flap mechanisms. I opted to do folded wings. However, I realized afterwards that if the wings are folded, usually the outboard flaps, the ailerons aren't in the down position. So technically not correct, but it looks pretty cool. One of the features of the F-18 is its extremely robust landing gear. So here I'm actually using the wheel wells essentially as a jig to line up all of the parts for the landing gear so that I can get them all glued together. Eventually I will pull them off and paint them separately, but this just helps get everything aligned correctly, so that I don't have to worry about trying to glue all these little parts later on when they're painted and I have the potential of scratching or ruining them. I just find this easier to do earlier on. But like I said, landing gear is extremely well detailed and looks really nice. So here we're fitting in the instrument combing and the front windscreen. Very nice, very clear. Fit here was fantastic. However, the main canopy does have a rather large seam line running down the middle, so in order to remove this, I first start by scraping it with a brand new knife blade. This is just the number 11, X-Acto blade. So the knife scraping just removes a lot of the built-up seam line. Then I'm going to start hitting it with increasingly finer grades of sanding sponge. And I think I started off with like an 800 grit sanding paper, and then went all the way up to 12,000 grit, I think, for the final polishing. So you can see here it's starting to clear up a little bit, doing a lot of wet sanding and checking to make sure that we're looking pretty good. It's still a little foggy, so it's going to require a little bit more work on there, but eventually we are able to get there. So I'm hitting that with some 6,000. Like I mentioned, I think I go all the way up to 12,000, wet sanding and polishing the canopy. Yeah, there's our 12,000 pad. So basically at this point, this is just a kind of final polishing. You could also use some like Tamiya polishing compound. I do have some Mr. Hobby polishing compound, but in the end, I got the results that I wanted, and we're looking nice and clear without a seam line. So pretty happy with that work. It's a little scary taking some sanding to your clear parts, but I do recommend practicing it, because removing things like seam lines on a canopy are very critical to help making your model look really nice. Meng does provide you a set of vinyl masks for your canopy, which is a really nice thought. However, I found that these vinyl masks were kind of low quality, and they pulled up often I had to constantly push them back down throughout the process, and you can see there's even like little wrinkles because they just could not conform to those compound curves very good. So now we can start the painting process. So I did hit everything with a coat of Tamiya Extra Fine Surface Primer in gray. And basically what I'm doing is kind of like a reverse black basing technique, almost like an old school pre-shading technique, but instead of pre-shading the panel lines, I'm actually pre-shading in the interior of the panels. So again, like I mentioned before, this is a CAG bird, and so relatively clean. So I wasn't going to go super heavy on weathering, and I didn't necessarily want like a really heavy marble coat underneath the main color. So this is just to create a little bit of variation, as I will be doing a relatively full coat of the actual base colors on the model. So with that pre-shading done, we can start laying down our Compass Ghost Gray, and sorry, this is the light Compass Ghost Gray. So we're just going to build it up in nice thin layers, and by doing thin layers like this, it allows me to build up those layers, build up the opacity to a point where I'm happy with, and it just gives me a little bit more control over the final look that I want for the paint job. So it's just a matter of going around the whole model. So this is for all the undersides. So this is pretty much close to what the final coat's going to look like. You can see I'm just barely leaving a little bit of that pre-shading in, just to create a little bit of variation, but not like really heavy weathering at this point. And yeah, now we can move on to the upper surface. I didn't get a lot of footage of painting the upper surface, but really it's just the same thing as the underside, and just a matter of going over, getting our pre-shading covered up to the point where I'm happy with the opacity, and we can move on. One of the reasons why I chose the Tomcatters library, I liked the combination of the black and the red, especially on the tail and the spine of the aircraft. So here I'm just painting up the tail with that red color, and now I'm going to go in with black after masking that little fin flash off. And I just think this is a really great combination. The other reason I liked using the gray primer as opposed to a black primer is just because it helps with undercoating colors like red, which kind of tend to have a little bit of an issue going over really dark base colors. So here we're just giving a nice good coat of the satin black, and we're going to do the same thing along the spine. This was a little difficult to mask off, just because I had to make sure I was getting these lines nice and even between both sides, and because they're really long, it's a really long masking line over a relatively complex set of curves. I really had to make sure that I was getting it correct, so that it didn't look funny if you were looking at it like from the top or the sides or something, but got there in the end. And I really like these navy high-vis schemes, especially when they do like the black spine, or some kind of color along the spine. I think it really helps make things look good. So this antenna here, it gets painted separately. This also gives the F-18 its ubiquitous Rhino nickname. Supposedly that's supposed to be the horn of the Rhino. I don't really see it, but that's what I'm told. Painting up some of the exhaust stuff. I think the exhaust nozzles are probably the weakest area of this kit. The detail was just really soft. I didn't like how it looked. I actually ended up purchasing and printing out some 3D replacements, some resin replacements. However, they weren't much better than the kit stuff, so I just ended up with the kit stuff. And the kit, or the F-18 exhaust nozzles, have that really distinctive pattern on the inside, and I spent a good couple hours masking off all those little squares on the inside of the exhaust and painting that. But I'm glad I did, because in the end it looks pretty good. But I think if I were to build this kit again, I would definitely purchase a good set of aftermarket nozzles that have just sharper detail. So now we're going to go ahead and give everything a nice gloss coat. This will be preparing us for decals and panel wash. So just make sure we go over the whole model here, get a nice good coat everywhere. You do see I did a little bit of like anti-corrosion painting on the upper surface there, just to help create a little bit of detail. So here I am applying the pinstriping details. I had considered painting this red line, but I was just a little concerned about getting it a consistent width. So ultimately I went with the decals, and the decals performed perfectly. They fit where they were supposed to, how they were supposed to. And because the decals come in, 3 separate parts, and they're all just a little bit longer than they should be, allows you to overlap them a little bit, and it really just allows you to adjust and get them into position without any real hassle or trouble. So just kind of got to go over this and get these all into place. Lining them up wasn't terribly difficult. It's just kind of time consuming with how long they are. But they do, you have to make sure you're getting them in the right order, because this back one actually does come tapered to a point. So just be aware of that. But it's pretty straightforward. Rest of the decals going on. I had no problem with the Meng decals. I found them to be extremely easy to work with, and just kind of the perfect thickness, like not too thick but not super thin and fragile. So I didn't really have any issues with the decals. They went on good, reacted really well to Solvaset. I think I only needed like one application of Solvaset to really get these things to snuggle down and expose all the nice surface detail underneath. So highly recommended. I don't know how they would work with like Microsol and Set, or Tamiya decal setter, but they worked really well with the Solvaset. So now I'm just going to apply another layer of gloss coat over the decals. This will just help protect our decals against weathering and washes. So I'm going to give this a wash using the Interior Wash by Ammo Mig. So this isn't nearly as dark as the dark brown wash that I normally use, and I did that on purpose, just so that I wanted to be able to highlight the panel lines but not like make them super dirty. So it's just a matter of going through, and I wasn't being terribly careful on getting this applied, so kind of slightly heavy here, but it because I have that nice gloss coat underneath, I'm able to remove all the excess without too much issue here. It's just once it's dry, you just wipe it away. Please note that I don't have any like thinner on my paper towel here. This is just a dry paper towel. I have found that thinner, if you apply it too heavily, will eat through the aqua gloss coat. So basically just a dry paper towel is needed to remove everything. Stubborn areas, you can use a cotton bud. And if there's any really stubborn areas the wash just does not want to come off, then I would recommend getting a brush and getting a little bit of enamel thinner on the brush to help remove it. But again, you want to minimize how much thinner you're putting on, and so that you don't ruin that gloss coat. All right, now with the wash down, we can give it a nice flat coat. For this, I'm using Mr. Color Flat Clear, or Semi-Gloss Clear. I wanted to go for, kind of a satin semi-gloss look, since that's kind of the look of the actual aircraft. So this just worked perfectly. This was just the right mix of satin and, semi-gloss and matte. Really happy with how it looks. So we just go ahead and give the whole model a nice good coat of the semi-gloss. So this protects all of our weathering that we've already done so far, and just starts tying everything together. You do need to spray this in. You do need to spray the semi-gloss like as a nice good solid coat. Don't mist it on. It won't give you the proper look. Now we can start doing some oils. Even though I am going for a clean bird, the F-18 still would get dirty. So just applying some mineral spirits to the bottom of the aircraft, applying some black and brown oil paints here to represent kind of all the grime and oil and whatever leaks out of these things. So now we can just start blending it. So this is just a round brush that's been damped with mineral spirits, and we just start blending in these colors, creating this kind of splotchy pattern along the bottom side of the aircraft. And at this point, I'm just kind of using a stippling motion, and really this is just designed to help blend that, remove some of the excess here on a paper towel, so that you're not just moving it around. You really want to blend that in. And it also helps laying down the mineral spirits ahead of time as well, just to help the blending. Just adding a little bit of, thin down oil paints around these areas here, just to kind of denote a little bit of wear, because it is an active aircraft and it would have some. Now I'm using this really thin flat brush here to kind of create some streaky effects through what we've already just done. This is damped with thinner as well, so that kind of helps create the streaking effect. Essentially parting what's already there. There is a little bit of, I assume, like hydraulic leakage along the back end here where the elevators are. That was pretty prominent on pictures that I had seen. So I wanted just to kind of try and replicate that there. And again, just using the same technique we used on the bottom, where we apply the thinner, we apply the paint, and then we blend it in. So pretty straightforward, I think. I've really enjoyed using oil paints, so they're fun and versatile. So at this point, we can kind of really just do all of our final touches here to the aircraft. Here is the infrared pod. Get our pilot in there. The Meng has a really nice system for attaching weapons to the pylons using these pins and polycaps inside the weapons, so you don't actually have to glue them, at least the larger weapons. So that was kind of nice. The landing gear goes on. These are essentially just a push fit, but I add a little dab of super glue on there. They are keyed, so they go on in a very specific way, but they're not. You don't get like weight on wheels. So if you want to do that, you'll have to sand them down and flatten them a little bit. Nose wheel going on. Pretty straightforward. We can start applying our missiles. So I really wanted to show this thing loaded up, but I had someone point out to me on Instagram that I probably overloaded the jet with ordnance. And yeah, probably not super realistic, but I think it looks pretty cool. Here's those pins that I was talking about. So the fuel tanks and the large ordnance just slot onto these pins in the pylons. Really quite nice. So I mean, theoretically, you could play around with swapping out different loadouts if you wanted to paint it all up. You do get a lot of weapon options out of the box, so that's pretty nice. You do get 3 drop tanks as well, so you do get options here. Putting on the landing gear doors. These fit really well, no issues. Remaining drop tanks going on. Those were fun to paint up and weather. And we got our laser guided bombs here. And then finally we have our AMRAAMs. So like I said, I think I have this overloaded with weapons, but it just looks cool. The F-18, I mean, when you've got all those pylons, you might as well use them all, right? But I guess that's why I'm not in the Navy. Some antennas going on. It is nice that these are provided separately and that you can install them basically at the very end, because I'm the type of person that would knock these off within the first 5 minutes of putting them on, and that's just kind of a pain. So canopy going on, and that's gonna essentially wrap up this build. So I really had a lot of fun doing this build, and it actually went pretty quickly. I think start to finish I had this thing done in like 2.5 weeks. It was pretty straightforward. You don't need to do you really don't need to do a lot of modifications to it. Like I said, I would probably recommend getting some aftermarket burner cans, maybe an aftermarket ejection seat, but other than that, it's a great kit. You get lots of great detail, lots of great options out of the box, and after building this, I really want to build the other 2 Super Hornets in the series, so the 2-seat F model and then the Growler model as well. And obviously I'll do the 2-seater up as Jolly Rogers because that just looks so good. But yeah, I highly recommend the main kit. It has some complex stuff on it, but it's really a pretty easy build. They make the build pretty straightforward. Minimal cleanup for seam lines, and the ones that you do have to clean up really don't take a lot of effort to get cleaned up. Really nice engineering, lots of great weapon options. So yeah, this is a 10 out of 10 kit for me. I'll definitely build the other 2 in the series minimum, if not more, just because I really enjoyed this kit. I really like the Super Hornet. I think it's a great looking aircraft, and who knows, maybe I'll need to build Maverick Super Hornet at some point, because it's just a fun movie. Anyways, if you've made it this far, thank you. I appreciate it. Consider subscribing if you're not a subscriber. Hit the like button, and tell me what you think down in the comments below. I really like interacting with you and hearing what you have to say. I want to give a shout out to all of my patrons for helping support this channel and bringing content like this to you. If you like what you see, please consider subscribing to my Patreon and help me to make more content like this. So thank you, and we'll see you on the next video.